Made of Silk and Steel by All Marvel No Get Off My Sheets. Chapter 5. All told, Jess was maybe asleep for less than an hour, but when she opened her eyes, her mind was made up. It probably wasn't the wisest plan she'd ever had, but never let it be said that Jessica Jones was wishy-washy. Briefly, she even considered taking Matt along with her, but quickly decided against it. Salinger was not quite as brilliant as he fancied himself, but Jess believed that he was clever enough to make connections between Daredevil and Peter's father if they were repeatedly within close contact with each other. Daredevil was an important ace up their sleeve, and Jess wasn't going to risk letting Salinger look too hard at Matt Murdock. So, full of fury and with a chip on her shoulder, Jessica went to the gym where Salinger actually had the audacity to be teaching a bunch of freaking kids. As though he hadn't stolen a boy just like one of these from the people who loved him. Well, maybe not exactly like one of these, but an innocent kid all the same. "I thought I might see you soon," he said, with a smug smirk that made Jessica want to break his whole goddamn face. He saw the contained rage in her eyes and said, still dangerously smug considering who he was talking to, "Remember, Jones, if you kill me, you may never see your son again." "Maybe I can find out if I hit you hard enough," Jessica growled, fists clenching, a dark part of her thrilling as the whites of Salinger's eyes grew just ever so slightly wider. "In front of all these witnesses?" he scoffed. "You'd be in prison, maybe for the rest of your life. You've got quite a record, you know." Jess glowered at him. "Listen to me, you worthless pig," she said lowly, her volume in consideration of the children around them, hissing the syllables out. "I think you already understand that Peter is the one thing I really love. So I need you to believe me when I tell you that if you hurt my son, I will kill you. And there ain't a thing that's gonna stop me. I don't give a shit how long I spend in prison. I'll go happily if I find out that you did anything to hurt my kid." Like mother, like daughter, she supposed. "As repulsive a woman as you are, I suppose you are a decent mother," Salinger mused, and Jess snorted. "Oh, goody! Yeah, you're really the endorsement I was looking for this whole time." She gave him a hard stare, unrelenting. "Do we understand each other? I'm only playing nice as long as I think Peter is safe. If I think you're anywhere close to hurting him, I won't hesitate." "I have no problem returning what belongs to you, Miss Jones," he said, lip curling into a sneer. "Just as soon as you return what Patricia took from me." Jess eyed him in disgust. "Your little trophies, you mean? Your snuff book?" A young boy interrupted their conversation, a somewhat meek-sounding child that said, "Coach, the other kid took my partner." Sounding eerily genial, Salinger said, "It's all right. You don't need a partner to improve. Practice your top stance, okay?" "Okay," the boy agreed, still sounding hesitant. Jessica's teeth ground into each other. This man had no freaking business being anywhere near a child. Salinger was staring at her, clearly registering her anger, and he looked amused. He almost always did, as though he were a scientist she thought with revulsion, and she were an especially fascinating species of butterfly pinned to a corkboard. Another one of the ants among his colony. "It really bothers you, doesn't it?" "The idea of you being near a kid makes me sick," she said bluntly, eyes narrowed. "That's funny. I could say the same thing about you," he said coolly. the amusement falling away to reveal the icy disdain lurking beneath it. He gestured out to the mats where the children were practicing with each other. If you long to beat me, you only need to ask. The rules are simple, though, of course, you'd never bother to fight fair. You don't want me to do that, Jessica scoffed, eyes rolling, because I want your head mounted on a wall somewhere. You can't control yourself. You have no discipline, Salinger said softly, with a strangely satisfied gleam in his eyes that made her want to shake him and keep shaking until he shrieked for her mercy she was finding in very short supply. Just brute force. And you want me to kick your ass so that I won't make trouble for you anymore, she said. After another moment spent grinding down her molars, she doesn't gesture at the parents filming on their smartphones, but she doesn't need to. You think I'm gonna lose my shit in front of all these cameras? It's in your nature, he stated, as though he were some sort of freaking expert on Jessica Jones, which she may have admitted that Kilgrave was, but not this slithering psychopath. People want to know the truth, especially yours. No, they don't, she wanted to say. They want to know as much as they can stand hearing, and not a thing more. But she didn't, because Salinger was one of those people who couldn't stand a single moment in the reality of Jessica's truth. People like him were much more comfortable living in the world only as they saw it, and how close that was to the reality of what happened around them didn't concern them overly much. She sauntered out to the mat, gesturing with a hand tone always just south of sarcastic. School me. Want to make sure I'm playing fair? And God, didn't he just sound like a twisted version of Trish that way? Only children complain that life should be fair. Children and adults who hadn't really grown up yet. The rest of the world had already realized that nothing was fair. You just tried to do your best with what you had and hope that everything broke, even at the end. Salinger looked more amused than ever before, but he got the kids to clear away from the mat. Everybody over here, have a seat, okay? You get disqualified for kicking, scratching, biting, hitting, or swearing, he added, looking especially entertained as Jessica rolled her eyes again. You slam your opponent's body to the mat, or you twist any body part out of its normal range of motion. Other than that, it's pretty simple. The first person to pin their opponent to the mat wins. You got it, Jess said, looking and sounding bored. I won't ask you to go easy on me, because I know you won't. He crouched down, looking somewhat like a crab in gray sweatpants. Freaking Christ. Go. Oh, he had no idea. Jess had to go easy on every human she'd ever hit. He couldn't imagine the things she could do to the human body if she wanted to. She stared at him, more unimpressed than ever at that stupid little crab dance. Salinger sighed and stood. Okay, you also get disqualified for passivity if you don't do anything. Mocking, she replied. Oh, I'm just waiting on you to show me some moves. Ah, okay. Salinger crouched again before surging forward, catching Jess by the legs and throwing her down, sending her to the mat face first before forcefully throwing her onto her back. She lay there, mostly without struggling. He taunted, "You can't hold back forever. It's not you." He was strong and fast for a human, but only for a human. Jess brought a hand up and shoved him in the center of the chest, sending Salinger to the other side of the mat, flying ass over tits. Around them, the children clapped and cheered at this display, but Jess felt her focus zero in on Salinger, predator to prey, except that he kept making the mistake of believing that she was prey. She wasn't even breathing harder. All that practice and you still suck ass. She could see that moment his cool taunting twisted into dark anger, just before he charged at her. Trying to surge forward the way he had the first time, all Jess had to do was take a little step to the side, lightly for her, pushing at his arm to carry his momentum past her and send him tumbling back to the floor. The cheering and clapping was louder this time, and Jess looked around, once again reminded that there were people watching and this was not just an exercise in relieving her pain and rage. Scowling furiously, Salinger made a third charge at her, arms wrapping around Jessica's waist, but this time he found that he couldn't even make her move from her standing position. Grabbing the back of his shirt, Jess tossed him aside the way she might throw her keys into a bowl, effortless and careless, sending him sprawling onto the ground. When she picked him up by the neck like a wayward kitten, he hissed, "All they see is a cheater." She smirked with satisfaction as their audience exclaimed enthusiastically in the background, "Now who's lying to themselves?" And with that, she flipped him over and let him fall gracelessly back down to the mats again, Salinger so winded that he was clearly incapable of standing. Jessica paced around him like a caged lioness, waiting just a moment, letting him attempt to rise again before planting her boot on his chest. "No body slams," she drawled, unrepentant. "Guess I lose." "They'll see who you are," he snarled beneath his breath. "They'll all see you and your unnatural son." "Let them. Just remember, I don't mind going to jail. Not for him. And you'll see me around." She waltzed away, calling over her shoulder, "Class dismissed." The kids whooped and hollered as she walked off, thrilled that the mysterious woman dressed in leather, who'd only stayed long enough to destroy the coach without even breathing hard. She let herself smile, just a little. By the time she was back in her own living room, Jess was covered in a cold sweat and resisting the urge to pace. Why had she done it? Why didn't she stop herself when she knew that Salinger was trying to goad her? "Jess," she heard Trish ask quietly from her bedroom door, "is everything all right? Any news?" "Oh, everything's great," she said sarcastically, "except for when I can't resist putting my son's life in danger. Everything's just peachy." "What do you mean?" she asked, alarmed by Jessica's faceless tone. "What happened?" Though she gave Trish shit for her heroism without acknowledging that her actions have serious unintended consequences, Jess had to tell her the entire story about the way she had taunted Salinger in return for his attempt to bait her. "I humiliated him," she whispered, recalling the toxic, impotent fury in his face. Her stomach turned over and she relaxed her hand before she could crush her coffee cup. "And now Peter could get hurt because I pissed off a psychopath." "Oh, that doesn't mean..." Trish began hastily. "No," she said sharply. "Trish, you didn't see the look on his face when those kids and parents were cheering me on. I humiliated him in front of people that he believed respected, maybe even admired him. Salinger will make me suffer for that, and Peter is probably going to be the one to pay the price."
After only a moment of hesitation, Trish reached out and laid her hand upon her sister's forearm, giving her arm a tentative squeeze. I know why you're afraid. I know that you're scared for him, she murmured, but from what you've told me, Peter isn't exactly helpless either. If he really believes that he's in danger, I don't think he'll let Salinger harm him. What are you thinking about? Matt asked quietly, with the knowledge of Peter's disappearance hanging over them and their meager information on Salinger's background to go on. All of the life seemed to have been sucked out of the office. Foggy and Karen had been almost worryingly quiet the whole day. I'm thinking about superheroes, genetics. I've been thinking about what Peter can and can't do, Foggy admitted, mostly so that I don't go crazy. I admit that I did feel a little better after Jess told us he has her strength. Strength and smarts, Matt said slowly, but Jess and I aren't exactly bottom of the class either, so that might not be why. He has a really good coordination, but I don't know, how coordinated should a 7-year-old be? I think it is the super part, Foggy mused. I've noticed that I guess I'm used to how quick you are on your feet and stuff. I didn't really think of it until now. Matt sighed aloud. He's got some kind of precognitive ability. Maybe something to do with his eyesight? I'm sure that's what was causing his migraine. And Jess said he knew that Salinger was bad news as soon as they met him. He faked having an asthma attack so that Jessica would get them away. Well, then he's obviously pretty used to hiding what he can do. He lies and uses tricks to disguise his powers, Foggy observed lightly. He added, sounds like someone else I know. He frowned, feeling uneasy. He never really had a problem with hiding his abilities. He'd felt guilty about lying to Foggy and Karen about what he was doing, and he'd been really conflicted about what he did as Daredevil to begin with, but he'd learned to conceal himself from Stick. Why or how had Peter learned to lie? This isn't it actually the first time something like this has happened? Something like faking an asthma attack? Foggy asked, puzzled. No, Matt confessed quietly. Like Peter suddenly getting scared for no reason. Jess told me after it happened that he started freaking out during the walk back home the night he met Maggie. But he just lost the last family member he had. He was living with 2 strangers, even if he liked us. She assumed he was just stressed out about the situation, didn't know how to cope. But now I'm thinking maybe it didn't happen for no reason after all. Maybe he has your kind of hearing? Maybe he heard something that disturbed him. Foggy guessed, though Matt could tell that he wasn't convinced himself. He sighed again, leaning back in his chair. Glumly, he said, if we ever get him back, I suppose we can find out. Don't think like that, his best friend said sharply. Matt could not see the way the lines around his eyes tightened, but he could hear the slight waver in his voice. Don't say shit like that. He's the smartest kid I've ever met, and he has real, actual superpowers. We don't really understand what they are, but we do know he's not a sitting duck. Even if we don't find him, I know Peter will find his way back, Matt. Matt flexed his fingers, resisting the urge to punch something out of pure frustration. Yeah, he huffed, head bowed. He had to believe him. He had to, because thinking that he would never find his son again left his future a black hole that Matt couldn't bear to contemplate. Yeah, I guess so. Karen, who had been wandering around in a lackluster fashion, draped herself over a chair with the attitude of someone whose mind was still not presently in the room with them. Foggy nudged her. You've been awfully quiet the whole morning. What are you thinking about? There was a moment of silence as Karen considered her answer. It's kind of morbid, she admitted, and it's more than kind of silly. Silly, I can handle. I'm less sure about morbid, Foggy said with a slight smile, trying to keep their spirits high. What you got? I've been thinking about Hannibal Lecter, Karen said finally. I'm thinking about The Silence of the Lambs. Ah, said Foggy. I'm not saying it's not thematically appropriate. If anything, it might be a little too on the nose. But Jess in her new tag-alongs didn't mention anything about Salinger being an actual cannibal. Care. Want to share with the class? Well, really, I've been thinking about The Silence of the Lambs, she said, fingers instinctively poised around the shape of a pencil. Have you seen it or heard it, Matt? Yes, said Foggy, and Matt said no. I don't tend to enjoy horror or thriller and suspense films because a lot of the tone is designed to come through in the skill of cinematography. Why have you been thinking of it? Karen had an instinct for danger, a nose for trouble, and Matt knew better than to doubt her. Salinger wants the evidence that Trish took in return for Peter, right? But we obviously can't let him get away with everything he's done. She licked her lips. In The Silence of the Lambs, Clarice asks Hannibal Lecter how to catch the serial killer she's chasing, and he asks her to examine the killer's nature. What does he do? He covets, Foggy murmured. And how do we learn to covet? And they both said, we covet what we see every day. He stared at Karen for a moment, speechless, before telling her, You're brilliant. That's exactly how we're going to get him, Care. I'm going to need a refresher course, Matt said, head turning between the two of them. What do you mean? Salinger doesn't hate people with special powers. He wants to be them, Foggy informed him with a feral grin. And he tries to prove he can be better than they are by killing them. If we want to catch him, we shouldn't be looking at the victims in his book. We should be trying to find out where he got his start. Who was victim 0? Matt visibly perked up, back straightening, salivating for a way to put this monster into a cage where he would so clearly deserve to belong. He'd have been sloppier, less careful, he agreed. Where is Gregory Salinger's hometown? Karen scrambled for a moment in her notes. Where, she grimaced at the notebook. Wappingers Falls, New York. Though he'd only been away from home for less than a day, Peter was pretty much used to being a little bit hungry and a little bit cold all the time now. He sort of assumed he would have to get used to it anyway. He'd been scared at first, but it was difficult to be scared all the time, so mostly he was now bored. He spent a lot of time wondering where his parents were and what they were doing. What he didn't wonder was if they missed him. His dad, Matt, Peter had never seen him look like that. He'd seen him happy in the park, eating ice cream, mischievous on the train as Peter sat on Jess's lap. Annoyed when the dryer broke, mad about something that happened at work, long-suffering with Jess or Foggy's teasing, sad when he talked about Grandpa Jack, how much he would have liked to meet Peter. But Peter had never seen him look hurt that way before. It made something in his stomach twist, both in bad ways and even good. The Parkers, his first parents, had loved him, but he didn't really remember that too well, and Aunt May used to call him her shining light. It wasn't the same, though. When you were adopted, it was the same as knowing that the people who created you loved you and wanted you. Mom and Dad, his second parents, did. And Peter had lied to them for weeks. He's been lying to them, putting his mom in danger and scaring everyone with his migraine when he'd used his powers without meaning to. Not that he ever really meant to, it always just seemed to happen. Would they forgive him whenever he managed to return home? Thou shalt not lie. When they'd gone to church to visit Grandma Maggie, Matt had told him that lying was a sin. He said it was something you should work on not doing. Would they want to keep him if he told the truth? But what if they found out he was lying? What if Salinger told them that Peter wasn't a normal child? Peter stared at the wall, anxiously hugging his knees to his chest and resisting the urge to chew on his nails. Should he return home, though? Going back would mean having to face telling Matt and Jess the whole truth. Maybe not tomorrow or the next day, but Peter now had to concede that telling them was probably not optional anymore. He didn't think he was pretty sure now that they weren't going to be mean to him, but that wasn't the same as loving him the way they'd love any other child. At least Peter was confident they wouldn't take him on television shows and make him perform stupid tricks for an audience like an especially talented poodle. But Peter thought about that look on his dad's face. Like he'd never smile again, and he knew that he was going to go back, no matter what happened afterwards, though he still didn't know how he wasn't going to get back. He didn't even know where he was right now. He was pretty sure that he was still in New York City because the sounds and smells were still pretty much the same. It would have been easy enough for him to escape, even if the door was locked. The door and walls to this place were only made of metal, but wouldn't Salinger just be able to find him again? Maybe. The door in the lower level swung up, and Peter sprawled over the thin mattress on his back, quickly scrambled upright to lean against the wall, staring wide-eyed as Salinger stalked into view. His heart sank when he noticed that he didn't seem to be carrying any food with him. His presence in the room, even in this building, made Peter's skin feel like someone was rubbing his whole body with poison ivy and stinging nettles and wool sweaters. The pain was distracting him, and that distraction was dangerous. Peter screamed shrilly in terror and pain as he grabbed him by the shoulder. His nerves dipped in fire as Salinger made contact with his bare skin, the man staring at him as so fascinated as he tried to twist away, only gripping more tightly. She didn't earn it. She didn't earn it, he whispered, watching Peter scream with sick clinical curiosity. You didn't earn it either. She's unnatural, and so are you. He had no idea what the man was talking about. He just wanted the pain to stop. Peter twisted until he could make contact with Salinger in return, though deliberately touching him was also like putting his hands on a hot stove. Blindly, he pushed away with his left hand and yanked on his arm with his right. Salinger echoed his shriek with one of his own. Distantly, Peter heard 3 separate cracking sounds, and finally, Salinger released him. Mindlessly, Peter scrambled past the man and out the door, racing out into the cold air of November without his jacket, scarf, or gloves, or his backpack and schoolwork. Not that he would even notice these things until later. He ran full tilt without really noticing where he was going. He was still in the city, but he didn't recognize anything he saw, and his skin was still pulsing with little aftershocks of pain. His senses were tingling all over the place, and he really couldn't tell if that was because he was surrounded by danger or if that was also caused by the after effects of being touched by Salinger's bare hands. Peter stared mutely down at his own hands, though he hadn't exactly done it on purpose. He knew he must have broken at least Salinger's nose, and he couldn't help but feel that the man had deserved it, even though everything Peter had ever been taught told him that hitting was wrong. Uneasily, he realized that the sun was starting to go down, and he still didn't really recognize where he was.
Distantly, he could see the figure of buildings thrusting into the city skyline, but the landmark that was always his guiding compass, Avengers Tower, was nowhere to be found. He was starving, cold, lost, and I still can't go back home, he realized, staring down at his fingers again. Salinger is still after me, and he's gonna be even madder now. What if he hurt Mom, or Dad, or Aunt Karen, or Uncle Foggy? He was seriously considering trying to find Uncle Luke and asking him and Aunt Claire for some heavy-duty help when a deep voice said, "Peter? You're Peter Parker?" Peter began, turning around. His face was on TV now. So he just had to convince whoever this was that he was definitely not Peter, definitely not lost, and no, you should definitely not call his parents. His eyes widened and his jaw moved up and down soundlessly. "Oh," the Punisher sighed, eyeing him shrewdly. You recognize me." Peter said again, this time in a high-pitched squeak. He didn't see a gun on the man, but his senses were still tingling after that encounter with Salinger. He couldn't rely on them right now. Let's go," the man said, shocking him even more. "Go where?" Peter said weakly. Frank Castle grinned at him, the same kind of there and gone expression that reminded him painfully of his mother. "Do you like dogs, Peter? Karen said you like dogs." Uh-huh, he swallowed. "You know my Aunt Karen?" "Who do you think sent me to get you, kid?" End of chapter.